She's been telling you exactly where she wants to be touched, and she hasn't said a single word. That might sound like a puzzle, but it isn't. It's something that's been happening in real interactions, in real moments, probably in your life right now. And the reason you haven't seen it isn't because you weren't paying attention. It's because no one ever explained to you how the signal actually works. Most men spend years learning what women say they want. Very few ever learn what women over 40 are actually responding to, physically, emotionally, in their bodies, before any of the obvious things even become relevant. And there's a specific reason this particular thing stays invisible. It doesn't look like what attraction is supposed to look like. It happens before desire. It lives in a place most men have never thought of as intimate. And when you miss it, you don't get a warning. You just notice eventually that something between you never quite opened the way you expected it to. There is a specific place she wants you to touch her before anything else. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly where that is, why it matters more than anything that comes after it, and what it tells you about how women over 40 actually work. What worked at 28 doesn't just work less well at 45. For many women, it works backwards, creating the opposite of what you intended. This is the part that surprises most men when they first hear it, not because it's complicated, because it's so different from what they assumed. A woman's body and nervous system in her 40s are not simply an older version of what they were in her 20s. They've been changed, genuinely restructured in ways that are biological, psychological, and deeply personal by everything she's lived through. And one of the clearest changes involves how she receives physical touch. After 40, hormonal shifts alter the entire chemistry of physical contact. Estrogen levels, which once created a kind of consistent background readiness for touch, become more variable. Oxytocin sensitivity, the neurological response to physical connection and warmth, becomes more dependent on context. What this means in practical terms is that touch, which once felt exciting or simply neutral, can now feel intrusive, pressured, or wrong, not because of anything he did, and not because she's less interested, but because her nervous system needs something first that it didn't used to need in the same way. This isn't a preference shift, it's a physiological one. Think about that for a moment. The same hand, the same gesture, the same intention, landing completely differently because the internal environment she's bringing to that moment has changed. And here is the thing most men never consider. If the physical experience of touch has changed, then the entry point for touch has also changed. Something has to come before it now, something specific. And once you understand what her body is actually responding to now, the question becomes, what does she need before touch even enters the picture? There's a reason the same touch from you can feel wonderful one evening and unwanted 3 days later, and it has almost nothing to do with you. That sentence tends to land with a certain relief when men hear it, because most men, when they encounter that inconsistency, assume they've done something wrong. They retrace the conversation. They wonder what changed. They try a different approach and get confused when that doesn't work either. But the variability they're experiencing isn't about them. It's about her nervous system state. And that state functions like a gatekeeper that most men don't know exists. Here is how it works. The autonomic nervous system, the part of the brain that manages our threat response, our stress levels, our physical sense of safety, has two primary modes. One is the sympathetic state, which most people know as fight or flight. The other is the parasympathetic state, sometimes called rest and connect. In the parasympathetic state, the body feels safe, muscles soften, breathing deepens, defenses lower. Physical touch from someone trusted is received in an entirely different way in this state than when the nervous system is in low-grade alert. And here is the critical piece. Women over 40 are, statistically and neurologically, more likely to be carrying background stress than at any earlier point in their adult lives. Careers at a peak of complexity, children requiring different kinds of attention, parents beginning to need care, a long history of navigating relationships, which means a longer catalogue of moments where trust was extended and not honored. None of this is dramatic. Most of it is invisible, but it is present. And it means her nervous system is often in a mild state of vigilance, even when nothing specific is wrong. Physical touch that skips past this state doesn't just fail to land. It can actively trigger a retreat response, not because she doesn't want connection, but because her nervous system registered contact before it registered safety. The gate has to open first. So what actually regulates her nervous system? And what does that have to do with where she wants to be touched? The answer to that question lives in a part of her body that most men have never thought of as intimate at all. This isn't about a secret technique. It's about understanding which part of her body is listening for safety before the rest of her can open up to anything else. The upper back, the shoulders, the back of the neck. These areas are not arbitrary. They are neurologically significant in a way that most people never learn. The back of the neck and upper spine contain a dense concentration of nerve endings connected directly to the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and connect network that, when activated, moves the body out of vigilance and into openness. A slow, calm, non-pressured hand placed here does something that no other touch does quite the same way. It tells the nervous system, you are not in danger. Someone is behind you. You are held. Of course, the how matters enormously here. This isn't pressure. It isn't a massage that signals expectation. It isn't the beginning of something, and she has to feel that it isn't. The quality of this touch is slow, warm, and complete in itself. A hand that rests on the upper back without moving toward anything. A light contact at the back of the neck that doesn't pull or direct. The absence of agenda is not just a nice quality, it is the entire mechanism, because her nervous system is not just responding to the touch. It's reading the intention behind it. When she feels a hand placed here without pressure, without redirection, without the low hum of expectation she's learned to recognize over decades, something in her body genuinely shifts. The parasympathetic response activates. Cortisol levels drop slightly. Oxytocin begins to release. She doesn't consciously think any of this. She just feels suddenly and quietly safer. Now, you might be wondering, couldn't any touch in a calm moment do this? And the answer is not quite. The upper back and neck carry a specific association that goes beyond ordinary comfort. They are the places that, in our deepest evolutionary wiring, signal protection from behind. Someone who touches you gently there is not approaching you. They are standing with you. And that difference, felt in the body rather than reasoned in the mind, is everything. Knowing where isn't enough. The same touch in the wrong moment still misses her. And the timing is more specific than most men realize. This is where the majority of well-intentioned men still get it wrong. They learn something like this, they try it, and sometimes it lands beautifully, and sometimes they get a subtle withdrawal that confuses them. The touch was right, the location was right, but the moment wasn't. Her nervous system, as we've established, has a schedule. Not a calendar schedule, a contextual one. And there are specific windows when this touch opens something, and specific windows when it closes something instead. The moments when it lands correctly tend to be transition moments. When she walks through the door after a demanding day and hasn't yet shifted out of work mode, a quiet hand on her upper back as you acknowledge her arrival, without words, without expectation, is received differently than almost anything else. When a difficult conversation has just ended and the tension is beginning to settle, that is another window. When she is in a quiet parallel activity moment, sitting near you, reading, existing in shared space, that calm presence makes this touch feel like an extension of something already comfortable. The moments when it backfires are equally specific. When she is in task mode, mentally managing something, working through a problem, moving with purpose through a room, touch in this moment doesn't interrupt the task. It interrupts her sense of control, and the nervous system reads that as encroachment. When there is unresolved tension between you that hasn't been named yet, physical touch before the emotional air has cleared can feel like avoidance rather than connection. And when it becomes predictable, when she begins to feel that this touch always leads somewhere she didn't initiate, it loses everything that made it work. She's not inconsistent. Her nervous system has a schedule, and once you learn to read it, you'll stop misreading her. The 3 windows that open and the 3 that close aren't formulas to memorize. They're patterns to notice. You already know some of them. You've felt the difference in her response without being able to name it. Now you have the framework to understand what you are actually sensing, because what she feels in that moment isn't just physical. It's connected to something much older in how women relate to being held. She won't always be able to explain why that moment made her feel closer to you, but her behavior in the hours after will tell you exactly what happened. This is the layer that most explanations skip entirely, and it may be the most important one. Women over 40 have, in most cases, spent a significant portion of their adult lives being touched with agenda, not always with bad intent, but with a directional quality that over time becomes something the nervous system learns to brace for. Touch that moves towards something. Touch that is the beginning of a request. touch that carries the low-frequency signal of expectation. The body learns to recognize this pattern the way the mind learns to recognize a familiar word. It becomes automatic. And the automatic response to anticipated agenda is a subtle physical closing, a tightening that isn't quite refusal but isn't openness either. A touch with no destination does something fundamentally different. When she receives physical acknowledgement, real, unhurried, complete physical acknowledgement, from someone who then simply continues being present without pivoting toward anything, her nervous system does something it rarely gets to do. It relaxes fully, not just into the touch, but into the relationship, because that touch in that moment communicated something she didn't know she was waiting to hear. I see you as a person, not as a destination. The behavioral signs that this has registered are quiet but unmistakable. She moves slightly towards you rather than remaining neutral. Her breathing changes slower, deeper. She might rest her head, or her body weight shifts to be closer to where you are. She becomes warmer in the following hour, not dramatically, not performatively, just genuinely more present with you, more willing to initiate conversation, more comfortable in silence, more open in every sense of the word. Of course, this varies. Context always matters, and no single moment transforms everything. But the pattern, when it becomes real between two people, is one of the most reliable shifts you can create in a relationship. And it starts entirely with the quality of that first touch, its absence of pressure, its location, its timing, and what she understood from all three combined. Remember what I said at the beginning, that there was a specific place she wants to be touched before anything else, and that by the end of this video you would understand not just where, but why. We are very close to the deepest layer of that now, and this final part is the one most men never reach, because they stop just before the thing that makes all of it actually stick. The first time you do this right, she'll notice. The third time she'll start looking for it, but it's what you don't do afterward that she'll remember. This is the part that transforms a moment into a pattern, and the pattern is what changes everything. Women over 40 have been here before, not necessarily with you, but with the architecture of connection. Something begins well. There is warmth, there is attention, there is physical sensitivity that feels new and genuine, and then gradually it becomes transactional. The gestures that once felt complete in themselves start arriving with a directional quality. The touch that felt like presence begins to feel like prelude. She doesn't always say anything, she just notices. And slowly, the trust that was building begins to quietly recede. Her nervous system is not just responding to individual moments, it is building a model. It is asking over and over in the background of every interaction, is this consistent? Does this stay what it appeared to be? Or is there a pattern underneath it that I will eventually have to manage? This is why the most powerful thing is not the touch itself. It is the absence of what usually follows it. When she notices, and she will notice, that your hand on her upper back never becomes a hand moving somewhere else without her invitation, something shifts in her that is deeper than comfort. She stops preparing. She stops the low-level bracing that she may not have even been consciously aware she was doing. Her nervous system stops running the background calculation and begins to simply rest. And from that resting place, something else grows. Trust becomes desire, safety becomes attraction, consistency becomes the most intimate thing you have ever given her. The behavioral signal that tells you this shift has happened is subtle and specific. She initiates that touch herself. Not dramatically, she doesn't announce it, but one day you'll notice that she reaches for your hand during a quiet moment, or leans her back toward you before you've moved toward her, or tilts her head slightly as she passes close to you. That is not habit. That is her nervous system telling you that it has learned, through repetition without expectation, that this is a safe place to be. That is the moment most men never realize they created. Everything in this video has been pointing toward one thing, not a technique, not a rule, a different way of understanding what physical connection actually means to a woman over 40, and how the entry point for that connection is entirely different from what most men assume. Her body changed. Her nervous system became more sensitive to context, more attuned to the quality of presence behind a touch, more capable of distinguishing between contact that arrives with agenda and contact that arrives complete. And what she wants first, before anything else, before desire can even begin to move, is evidence that you understand the difference. The upper back, the shoulders, the back of the neck, slow, unhurried, without direction, in the right window of time, and then simply nothing that betrays it. You don't need to overanalyze this. You don't need to turn every moment into a calculation. What you actually need is to understand genuinely why this matters, and then let that understanding change how you show up. Because when it comes from real understanding, she feels the difference. Women always do. Has a woman in your life ever responded to a small, unexpected moment of physical acknowledgement in a way that surprised you? Tell me what happened in the comments. I read everyone. If this gave you something real to think about, subscribe, because on this channel, we don't just look at what women do. We look at why and what that actually means for the men in their lives. In the next video, I'm going to show you something that confuses almost every man who's gotten this far, why she suddenly pulls back right when things are finally going well, and what that withdrawal is actually asking you for.